Disfigured after risking her life to save Jacob from a devastating fire, Melanie believed her husband's love would be enough to face any scar. But instead of gratitude, she found abandonment. Unable to accept the marks that now defined his wife's face, Jacob broke his promises, leaving Melanie alone at the most vulnerable moment of her life. While he sought comfort in the arms of another woman, Melanie turned her pain into strength and determination, crafting a relentless plan for revenge that would change their lives forever. Melanie Collins was the kind of woman everyone admired. At 36 years old, she had built a solid career as the co-founder of Collins & King, a respected company in the San Antonio market, and seemed to have a perfect life alongside Jacob King, her husband and business partner. Together, they were seen as the ideal couple, talented, passionate, and successful. The glow of their relationship was evident to anyone observing from the outside, but like many seemingly perfect marriages, it hid deep cracks. Jacob was charismatic and ambitious, but also superficial and vain. To him, appearance and status were as important as success itself. Melanie, on the other hand, was practical and dedicated, more interested in building something meaningful than maintaining a flawless facade. Despite these differences, she loved Jacob unconditionally, believing the bond they had built over the years was strong enough to overcome any difficulty. But everything changed in a single night when a devastating fire consumed part of the house they shared. Awakened by the smell of smoke, Melanie didn't hesitate before risking her own life to save Jacob, who was sound asleep in the bedroom. After getting him out of the house safely, she went back to rescue some important belongings and ensure all the staff were out of harm's way. It was at that moment that part of the ceiling collapsed, leaving her gravely injured with severe burns that would mark her face forever. Melanie woke up days later in a hospital room, enduring intense physical pain but feeling relieved to have saved Jacob's life. However, her happiness was soon replaced by bewilderment. Jacob wasn't by her side as she had imagined he would be. At first, she thought he was busy handling practical matters, but as the days went by, his absence became increasingly evident. When Jacob finally appeared, his expression was one of discomfort. He seemed hesitant, almost incapable of looking at Melanie. "Jacob, I'm so happy you're okay," she said, trying to hold back tears. "Melanie, we need to talk," he replied, avoiding eye contact. What followed was one of the most devastating moments of Melanie's life. Jacob explained, without hesitation, that he couldn't cope with her appearance. He used cold, calculated words, making it clear that the love he claimed to feel for her wasn't strong enough to overcome the impact of her scars. "You understand, don't you? It's not just that everything has changed," he said as Melanie felt the ground collapse beneath her. Jacob left the hospital that night. No further explanations, no promises of support, no gratitude for the sacrifice she had made for him. Melanie, still fragile, had to face the harsh reality that the man she had risked everything for was not who she thought he was. The following months were a true nightmare. Jacob quickly filed for divorce, showing no concern for Melanie's feelings. He insisted on buying her share of Collins & King, claiming it was best for both of them. Exhausted and emotionally shattered, Melanie agreed, lacking the strength to fight for something that no longer seemed to matter to her. As Melanie struggled to rebuild herself, Jacob wasted no time moving on. Just weeks after the divorce, he publicly began a relationship with Amanda Brooks, his young and ambitious assistant. Amanda was everything Jacob valued: beautiful, glamorous, and seemingly devoted. The couple quickly became the sensation of San Antonio's social scene, flaunting a luxurious and carefree lifestyle. For Melanie, seeing Jacob and Amanda together felt like salt in the wound. The man she had loved now seemed to live without any remorse, surrounded by luxury and opulence. Meanwhile, she isolated herself in a small apartment, grappling with physical and emotional scars that seemed endless. Despite everything, Melanie decided she wouldn't allow Jacob to completely destroy her life. Slowly, she began to devise a plan to rebuild herself. Determined to regain her self-esteem and prove she was more than her appearance, she used the money she received in the divorce to start a new company. This venture, modest at first, became her absolute priority. Time passed, and Melanie began to achieve small victories. Though she still faced stares and prejudiced comments because of her scars, she found unexpected allies in the business world, people who valued her intelligence and determination above all else. As Melanie rose anew, Cracks began to appear in Jacob's seemingly perfect world. While he appeared to have everything under control, Amanda, his new wife, wasn't as loyal as he believed. Ambitious and manipulative, she began to take a more active role in Collins and King, under the pretense of wanting to help. Blinded by his infatuation with her, Jacob gave her full access to the company's finances and operations, unaware that Amanda was planning something devastating. Across the city, Melanie began hearing rumors about trouble at Collins and King. Though she had no intention of actively seeking revenge, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, knowing that the man who had abandoned her was about to face the consequences of his choices. San Antonio was a city of contrasts. Its streets, steeped in history, coexisted with modern skyscrapers, and the San Antonio River cut through the city like a bridge between past and present. For Melanie, this landscape was a metaphor for her own life, a mixture of painful memories and opportunities for renewal. In the months following the divorce, she sought refuge in quiet cafes and local markets, far removed from the glitzy corporate parties and gala events she had once attended alongside Jacob. In this anonymity, she began to rebuild her confidence. At times, the curious stares at her scars still bothered her, but she learned to ignore them. Every step toward her new life was a small victory. In those moments, she rediscovered the joy of connecting with people who didn't know her solely as Jacob King's wife. One of those people was Grace, a silver-haired woman with a warm smile who owned a small bookstore that had survived the encroachment of large chains. Unlike most, Grace didn't seem curious about Melanie's scars. She looked beyond them, seeing the strength in the woman who walked into her shop to escape her own thoughts. "You have something special, Melanie," Grace said one rainy afternoon as she poured tea. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Those simple words stayed with Melanie, resonating during the tough days. At the same time, she began attending meetings with local entrepreneurs, working to rebuild her network. At first it was challenging. Many still associated her with Jacob and Collins and King, but little by little, she began to prove that she was more than the name she had left behind. While Melanie was finding unexpected allies, Jacob was living a completely different reality. Surrounded by the luxury he always cherished, he seemed to have everything he wanted. Amanda, with her beauty and youthful energy, was the perfect companion for the social events he hosted. Yet behind closed doors, their relationship was far less ideal than it appeared. Amanda had her own ambitions, and her patience with Jacob was wearing thin. Shortly after their marriage, Amanda insisted on taking on a larger role at Collins and King. She claimed her modern vision would be an asset in attracting new clients. Jacob, dazzled by the idea that his wife wanted to contribute, gave her full freedom. What he didn't know was that Amanda was secretly transferring significant sums from the company into offshore accounts, preparing for a scheme that would change everything. Meanwhile, Melanie, unaware of Jacob and Amanda's intrigues, focused on growing her new business. Thanks to her experience and the respect she had earned from some former partners, she secured important contracts that ensured her company's initial stability. Each victory was a reminder that her capabilities were not tied to Jacob or what they had built together. One evening, while reviewing reports in her small office, Melanie received an unexpected call. It was a former client of Collins and King, someone she had helped secure years earlier. He was dissatisfied with the company's new management and was looking for alternatives. "Since you left, things haven't been the same, Melanie. I know your company is smaller, but I'd rather work with someone I trust." These words marked a turning point for Melanie. It wasn't just another contract. It was proof that her name still carried weight, even after everything that had happened. However, as she hung up the phone, she couldn't help but reflect for a moment. She knew Jacob was making mistakes, and that his new wife was probably not as trustworthy as he believed. Even so, Melanie didn't feel anger. She felt something different, a sense that time would take care of everything. Jacob, on the other hand, was beginning to notice small cracks in his perfect life. Amanda, once so devoted and passionate, was becoming distant. She spent hours on the phone or traveling for business meetings without providing details. When Jacob asked questions, she deflected with a charming smile that made him forget his concerns. However, the financial troubles at Collins and King were becoming impossible to ignore. Accounts didn't add up, payments were delayed, and suppliers complained about unfulfilled contracts. In his arrogance, Jacob believed these were just natural market fluctuations. But the truth was far darker. One night, while reviewing financial reports in his office, Jacob discovered transfers he didn't recognize. Significant amounts had been diverted to accounts linked to Amanda. At first, he tried to convince himself it was a mistake, but as the evidence mounted, denial became impossible. Amanda was stealing from him, and the scheme was far more sophisticated than he had imagined. Across the city, Melanie continued to thrive. Her company, now supported by a small but dedicated team, was starting to stand out in San Antonio. She fostered a collaborative work environment where people felt valued, something Collins and King lacked under Jacob's management. During a meeting with potential investors, Melanie reconnected with an old contact who shared an intriguing piece of information. He mentioned, almost casually, that Amanda seemed to be taking suspicious control of Collins and King's finances. "Looks like she's pulling the strings while Jacob doesn't even notice," the man commented. Melanie simply smiled, showing no surprise. She knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. And it did. After months of meticulous planning, Amanda executed her scheme. She drained the company's bank accounts, transferred assets, and disappeared, leaving Jacob with astronomical debt and no explanation. The scandal sent shockwaves through San Antonio. Collins and King, once a symbol of success, was now a bankrupt shell of its former self. For Jacob, the betrayal was catastrophic. Without Amanda, without assets, and without allies, he was left to face the harsh reality of his ruin. While he hid from the public to avoid humiliation, Melanie continued to rise, seizing the opportunities that emerged from Jacob's downfall. At that moment, it became clear that fate had settled its score. Jacob, who once rejected Melanie for not fitting his superficial ideal of perfection, now faced total isolation while she thrived, building a life fueled by courage and determination. Amanda's betrayal left Jacob completely shattered. On a grey morning, as the first rays of sunlight illuminated his empty home, he confronted the reality he had long avoided. Amanda was gone, taking millions of dollars from Collins and King, and even emptying his personal accounts. He tried desperately to contact her, but all he received was a curt message from an unknown number. "You gave me access to everything. The rest is history. Good luck." Jacob hurled his phone against the wall, anger swelling in his chest. But there was no one left to blame but himself. His pride and blindness had led him to this point, and now he was alone to face the consequences. The bankruptcy of Collins and King was inevitable. With no resources to cover the debts Amanda left behind, Jacob watched the empire he and Melanie had built crumble before his eyes. His former partners and investors, once loyal allies, now avoided him, fearing the taint of his ruined reputation. Sensationalist journalists lined up to capture the exact moment when the once powerful Jacob King hit rock bottom. Meanwhile, Melanie's ascent continued. Her new company, Collins Innovations, quickly became the go-to choice for clients disillusioned with the chaotic management of Collins and King. The rumors of Amanda's betrayal only bolstered Melanie's credibility in the market. Many who had once underestimated her now sought her expertise, drawn by the solidity and integrity she represented. Though Melanie refrained from discussing Jacob or Amanda publicly, the gossip was unavoidable. In meetings with former clients, she often heard comments about the company's collapse and Amanda's treachery. One such client, a businessman named Richard Parker, remarked during a lunch, "You know, Melanie, fate has a funny way of settling accounts. I always thought Jacob was a fool for letting you go." Melanie responded with only a serene smile. She didn't need to say a word. Her current life was the ultimate proof that she had completely moved on from the past. But Jacob wasn't ready to accept defeat without a fight. In a last-ditch effort to salvage what remained of his reputation, he tried to attract investors for a new venture, one he believed could help him rebuild. However, his credibility was in shambles. No one wanted to associate with the man who had lost everything, both in business and in his personal life. During this period of desperation, Jacob received an unexpected lifeline, an invitation to meet with Melanie. At first, he thought it was a cruel joke, but the invitation was genuine. One of Melanie's contacts had suggested she might be interested in acquiring some of the remaining assets of Collins and King to expand her own company. On the day of the meeting, Jacob entered Melanie's office, a mixture of anxiety and humiliation swirling inside him. He didn't know what to expect. When he saw her, he was taken aback by her presence. Even with the scars he had once rejected, Melanie radiated a confidence and strength he had never noticed before. Melanie, for her part, remained composed. She knew this moment wasn't about Jacob, it was about her. "Jacob," she began, her voice calm but incisive. "I'm here for business, nothing more." He tried to maintain his composure, but the weight of his situation was evident. I appreciate the opportunity. I know things didn't end well between us, but you destroyed everything, Jacob." Melanie interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. You chose appearance and status over love and loyalty. And now, you're here, expecting me to fix what you ruined?" Jacob felt a lump in his throat. There were no excuses for what he had done. All he could do was lower his head and accept her judgment. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," he said finally. "I just hope you can use what's left to build something better." Melanie studied him for a moment before replying, "I'm already building something better, and I don't need you for that." The meeting was brief. Melanie decided to acquire the remaining assets of Collins and King, but only those she deemed valuable for her company's growth. For Jacob, it was the final blow. He had lost everything, and now even the remnants of his old life were in the hands of the woman he had rejected. In the days that followed, Jacob tried to stay resilient, but reality hit hard. He lost his home, his possessions, and any hope of regaining his position in society. Without Amanda, without friends, and without resources, he fell into obscurity, working simple jobs just to survive. Meanwhile, Melanie flourished. Her company continued to thrive, becoming a cornerstone of the business community in San Antonio. She had built something far greater than she ever imagined, proving that resilience, intelligence, and heart could overcome even the deepest wounds. Jacob's name became a cautionary tale, a story whispered in boardrooms and at social gatherings about the man who lost everything by valuing the wrong things. Melanie, however, remained focused on the future, her scars a testament not to pain, but to the strength that had carried her through. Across town, Melanie continued to broaden her horizons. Her company thrived not only in San Antonio, but also in neighboring markets. During an interview with a business magazine, she was asked about her journey and what kept her motivated. "What drives me is knowing I can turn challenges into opportunities," Melanie replied. "The scars I carry are a reminder of where I've been, but also of how far I can go." Melanie's words resonated deeply with readers, establishing her not only as a successful entrepreneur, but also as a symbol of resilience. Meanwhile, Jacob faced complete isolation. He had withdrawn entirely from the world he once dominated, unable to cope with the shame and regret. Memories of Amanda and her betrayal haunted his days, but it was the thought of Melanie that tormented him most. He knew he had lost the one person who had genuinely cared for him, and it was entirely his fault. Every choice he had made, from the moment he abandoned Melanie in the hospital, now weighed heavily on his shoulders. He lived a solitary existence, working in a small distant town far from the life and people he once knew. Melanie, on the other hand, never looked back. Her life was filled with new challenges and triumphs, and over time, she found happiness not only in her professional success, but also within herself. Her journey wasn't about revenge. It was about proving that true worth lies not in appearances, but in inner strength. And so, while Melanie flourished, Jacob withered, confronting the consequences of his choices with a loneliness he never imagined. As Melanie cemented her place in the market with her new company, she began forming unexpected alliances. One such partnership was with Rebecca Adams, a former client who had severed ties with Collins and King after the scandals involving Jacob and Amanda. Rebecca, a visionary entrepreneur and owner of a local cosmetics brand that championed diversity and inclusion, was candid about her intentions when she approached Melanie. "You and I have something in common," Rebecca said with a knowing smile. "We were both underestimated by people who thought we weren't good enough, and we both proved them wrong." The partnership with Rebecca brought not only business opportunities for Melanie, but also an unexpected friendship. The two women shared stories of perseverance and often supported each other during tough times. Over dinner one evening, Rebecca posed a surprising question. "Have you ever thought about confronting Amanda? I mean, she practically destroyed Collins and King and left Jacob on his knees. If anyone deserves to hear some hard truths, it's her." Melanie hesitated before responding. "What Amanda did isn't my problem. What matters is that time has already put her in her place. And honestly, Confronting her wouldn't change a thing. She's already lost what mattered. Even so, Amanda's name occasionally surfaced in conversations. After her escape with the funds she embezzled from Collins and King, she had vanished from San Antonio's radar. Rumors began circulating about her downfall, suggesting she had attempted a similar scheme in another city and met a fatal accident while fleeing. When Melanie heard these stories, she felt nothing but indifference. Amanda had chosen her path, and Melanie was focused on walking her own. Grace, Melanie's friend and confidant, became an even more significant presence in her life. Always wise and observant, Grace often noticed nuances that Melanie overlooked. One quiet afternoon at the bookstore as they sipped tea, Grace made an observation that left Melanie thoughtful. "Have you noticed you no longer carry that weight on your shoulders?" Grace said. "When I first met you, you seemed like a woman just trying to survive. Now you look like someone who's truly living." Melanie smiled, touched by her friend's words. "I think it comes from finally feeling in control. For the first time in years, I know exactly who I am and what I want." Meanwhile, Jacob's decline became increasingly apparent. Now living in a small rented apartment in a distant neighborhood, he could barely sustain himself. Working temporary jobs to pay his bills, he spent his nights in silence, reflecting on everything he had lost. Though memories of Amanda haunted him, it was Melanie who occupied his thoughts most. Jacob avoided places where he might encounter old acquaintances, fearing judgment and humiliation. On a rare trip to a local grocery store, he ran into a former Collins and King employee. The man, surprised to see him in such a state, couldn't hide his curiosity. "Jacob, is that you? What happened to you?" Jacob only shook his head, muttering an excuse before hurrying away. He knew the answer to that question was too long and painful to explain in a grocery aisle. While Jacob languished, Melanie experienced soaring success. Her company was now recognized nationally, and her story of overcoming adversity inspired countless others. At an entrepreneurship event in Dallas, she was invited to share her journey on a panel. During her speech, she avoided mentioning Jacob or the most painful details of her life, but made her message of resilience clear. "Life will test you in ways you never imagined," she said. "But every setback is an opportunity to rebuild, to grow, and to prove, to yourself more than anyone else, that you're stronger than you think." Her words earned a standing ovation, cementing her as not just a business leader, but a beacon of hope for others facing their own challenges. As Melanie stood on that stage, confident and unapologetic, it was clear that her past no longer defined her. Instead, it had shaped her into a force that no one could ignore. We cannot control what life throws our way, but we can choose how we respond. Every obstacle is an opportunity to grow stronger. And above all, we must remember that our worth is not defined by how others see us, but by how we choose to see ourselves. The room erupted in applause, but for Melanie, the most rewarding moment came after the panel, when a young entrepreneur approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing your story," the young woman said. "I've been through something similar, and you've shown me that it's possible to move forward." Those words touched Melanie deeply. Despite all the material success she had achieved, it was the emotional impact of her story that she valued most. While Melanie found peace and purpose, Jacob sank deeper into his solitude. One day, as he walked past a cafe he used to frequent with Melanie during the early years of their marriage, he was overwhelmed by a wave of nostalgia. He sat in a corner booth and ordered a simple coffee, lost in memories of a time when he still believed anything was possible. The staff didn't recognize him. He was now just another ordinary man, without the shine or prominence he once carried. Staring into his coffee, Jacob wondered how he had let his life spiral to this point. The intertwined subplots of Melanie and Jacob's lives were clear reflections of their choices. While she moved forward, reaping the rewards of her courage and determination, he was consumed by regret. Every step Melanie took toward success was a reminder to Jacob of all he had lost. Yet Melanie had never sought revenge against Jacob. Her success was, to her, a testament to her strength and resilience. And although she knew Jacob's collapse was an inevitable consequence of his actions, she chose not to involve herself in his downfall. Life, after all, had taken it upon itself to teach him lessons she never could. Jacob's life was in complete disarray. His attempts to rebuild had failed, and any hope of restoring his career or reputation was now a distant memory. Without Amanda, without assets, and without allies, he faced a crushing loneliness, spending his days in silence in a cramped apartment, haunted by memories of the man he used to be. The nights were the hardest. Each thought brought with it painful regret. The cruel words he had spoken to Melanie in the hospital, the selfish choices he had made over the years, and the blindness that had led him to trust Amanda so completely. As Jacob sank further into despair, Melanie reached a milestone in her journey. Her company had just secured a multi-million-dollar contract with a national chain, solidifying her position as a leader in innovation. The news spread quickly across San Antonio, and many who had doubted her now sought opportunities to align with her. During one of these meetings, Melanie received unexpected news. One of the businessmen present, an old contact of Jacob's, casually mentioned that he had seen him at a local bar, visibly despondent. "It's sad to see what's become of him," the man said, "but I suppose he got what he deserved after everything." Melanie listened without responding, but the news stayed with her. It wasn't surprising that Jacob was in a bad place. She had always known that his fate would catch up to him. Still, hearing about his downfall so directly stirred a mix of emotions she couldn't quite identify. One evening, while reviewing reports in her office, Melanie received a message from Grace. Her ever-observant friend had heard through mutual acquaintances that Jacob was on the verge of being evicted from his apartment due to unpaid rent. "I don't know if this matters to you, but I thought you should know," Grace wrote. Melanie read the message several times before responding. "Thank you for letting me know. I'm not sure what to do with this information, but thank you." In the days that followed, Melanie tried to focus on her routine, but the thought of Jacob being evicted lingered. It wasn't compassion she felt. It was something more complex. It was the realization that the man who had once meant so much to her was now just a shadow of his former self. Then, something unexpected happened. A local newspaper published an article detailing Melanie's journey from the fire to her current success. The piece highlighted her resilience and courage, showing how she had overcome adversities that would have broken many others. Jacob, sitting in a cheap cafe, read the article over a watery coffee. Each word cut into him like a knife. He knew Melanie didn't need him, not his apology, nor his regret. She had grown into someone far greater than he had ever imagined, while he had become a man defeated by the weight of his own choices. Driven by a mix of remorse and desperation, Jacob decided to make one last attempt to reach out to Melanie. He spent hours drafting a letter, carefully choosing each word. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. He knew that was beyond his reach. It was a confession, an admission of everything he had done wrong, and how his actions had led to the destruction not only of Melanie, but of himself. When the letter arrived at Melanie's office, she hesitated before opening it. Sitting alone in her chair, she took a deep breath and began to read. Jacob's words were raw and unfiltered. He spoke of his regret, his loneliness, and his belated realization that he had destroyed the only true thing in his life. Melanie finished reading the letter and placed it on her desk. For a moment she felt a pang of sadness, not for Jacob, but for the waste of what he could have been. She knew responding wouldn't change anything. Her life was in a completely different place now, and Jacob was no longer part of it. A few days later, Melanie received unexpected news. Jacob had been hospitalized after collapsing in a restaurant. The diagnosis was extreme exhaustion and malnutrition, compounded by his emotional state. When Grace heard about the situation, she shared her thoughts with Melanie. "You don't have to do anything, you know that, right? He's reaping what he sowed." "I know," Melanie replied firmly, "and I won't. It's not my responsibility to fix what he destroyed." But as Grace watched her friend, she noticed a quiet acceptance in Melanie's eyes, an acknowledgement that fate was balancing the scales on its own. Shortly after being discharged from the hospital, Jacob's circumstances remained dire. He attempted to find work, but his tarnished reputation in San Antonio proved an insurmountable barrier. The man who was once a prominent figure was now ignored by those who had once flattered him. Meanwhile, Melanie's success continued to grow. Her company expanded into other states, and her story of overcoming adversity became a beacon for many women in the business world. In a national magazine interview, she was asked about her motivation. "My motivation is simple, to prove to myself that I am capable. My worth isn't defined by how others see me, but by what I achieve on my own merits." Melanie's words resonated with readers, further solidifying her image as an inspiring leader. While Melanie reaped the rewards of her determination, Jacob vanished completely from San Antonio's social circles. He scraped by with odd jobs in smaller towns, without connections or prospects for the future. Each day was a stark reminder of the choices that had led him there, and every memory of Melanie weighed on him in silence. The turning point was complete. Melanie, the woman he had abandoned and underestimated, had become a symbol of success and strength, while Jacob, who had sacrificed everything for status and vanity, was left alone, consumed by regret and isolation. The consequences of Jacob's and Melanie's choices had reached their fullest expression. For Jacob, there was no turning back. His days were filled with humiliating tasks and isolation, his existence seemingly devoid of purpose or hope. He spent countless hours reflecting on every wrong decision, from the moment he abandoned Melanie in the hospital to the day he handed control of Collins and King to Amanda. Jacob couldn't shake the memory of the article he'd read about Melanie. Each word painfully affirmed the truth. She had become everything he never believed she could be. He didn't know what was worse, seeing her thrive or knowing he had no part in it. But there was no anger or envy, only a crushing sense of regret that made getting out of bed each morning a challenge. Melanie, on the other hand, lived a reality completely removed from Jacob's. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities, but for her the greatest triumph wasn't financial success or the awards she received. It was the peace of knowing she had rebuilt her life entirely on her own. Her support network grew, and her partnership with Rebecca Adams flourished. Together, they developed a consulting project aimed at helping women entrepreneurs navigate the challenges of the business world. The idea stemmed from casual conversations about how both had been underestimated at some point in their lives. Still, Melanie wasn't immune to moments of reflection about the past. One quiet afternoon at River Walk, while sharing coffee with Grace, the conversation briefly turned to Jacob. "Do you think he still thinks about you?" Grace asked, her curiosity gentle and without judgment. "Maybe," Melanie replied, gazing at her reflection in the water. "But it doesn't matter. I've made peace with what happened. What he does or doesn't do has no place in my life anymore." Grace smiled, satisfied with the answer. Melanie had reached a point where the past no longer had the power to control her. While Melanie emotionally distanced herself from Jacob, he, on the other hand, sank further into his own guilt. On a rainy night, sitting at a makeshift table in his apartment, Jacob reread the letter he had sent Melanie. He knew she had read it, but the lack of a response haunted him. He wondered if she hated him, pitied him, or simply didn't care. "You did this to yourself," he murmured, his voice echoing in the silence of the small room. Jacob began working at a convenience store, spending long hours serving customers who barely glanced at him. One day, while restocking shelves, he overheard two men discussing Collins and King. One of them mentioned how Melanie had transformed the remains of the company into something bigger and more relevant than ever. Jacob tried to block out the conversation, but the words lingered. That night, as he left the store, he felt the crushing weight of his insignificance. Melanie hadn't just moved on, she had flourished in ways he could never have imagined. Melanie no longer concerned herself with Jacob. Her life was filled with new projects, challenges, and even possibilities she hadn't considered before. During a business trip to Austin, she reconnected with Daniel, a consultant she had worked with briefly in the early days of her new company. Daniel was calm, insightful, and possessed a practical vision that Melanie admired. They began spending more time together, and though she was cautious about the idea of another romantic relationship, there was something about Daniel that made her feel safe. During a dinner after a long meeting, Daniel asked her a question that caught her off guard. "Do you think you're still living in the shadow of what happened with Jacob?" Melanie, who had been relaxed until then, paused for a moment. "I don't think so. He's more of a reminder of who I don't want to be than someone who still has any control over me." "That's good," Daniel said with a soft smile, "because what you're building now has nothing to do with him. It's all you." Those words stayed with Melanie in the days that followed. She realized that while Jacob had been a significant part of her life, he was now just a symbol of what she had overcome. Jacob, on the other hand, couldn't escape the past. Memories of Amanda, Collins, and King, and most of all Melanie, were constant presences in his mind. He tried to find solace in work, but each day was a struggle just to keep going. On one particularly difficult night, while wandering the dark streets of San Antonio, Jacob passed by the old Collins and King headquarters. The building's lights were still on, but they now represented something entirely different, a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. He stopped for a moment, staring at the building before continuing on his way, knowing there was no place for him there anymore. Meanwhile, Melanie reached new heights. Her company expanded into international markets, and she began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events across the country. At one such event, she was asked how she dealt with adversity. "Adversity doesn't define who we are. It's how we choose to face it that shapes us," she said. "And I've chosen to face every challenge with courage and integrity." Her words were widely shared on social media, further reinforcing her image as an inspiring leader. For Melanie, it wasn't just about success. It was about creating something that represented her values. The consequences of Melanie's and Jacob's choices could not have been clearer. While she thrived in a world she had built with her own hands, he languished, trapped in a cycle of regret and isolation. Each was exactly where their decisions had placed them, and life's balance was as relentless as it was fair. Melanie was finally free. Jacob, on the other hand, discovered that living with the weight of the past was the harshest punishment of all. Each morning, Melanie woke with the sense that she was living the life she deserved. It wasn't just about her company's success or the recognition she had earned. It was about the inner peace she had finally found. The world around her seemed full of possibilities, and for the first time in years, she felt entirely in control of her path. Collins Innovations, her company, had become a market leader, known for its transparency and solutions that went beyond the conventional. Melanie was admired not only for her leadership, but also for her story of resilience, which inspired women across the country. Her journey, marked by physical and emotional scars, was a testament to strength, a narrative the media often highlighted in interviews and articles. Despite the acclaim, Melanie stayed grounded. She knew success was only part of the equation. True growth came from within. This mindset led her to invest time in herself, not just as a leader but as a person. She always reserved moments to walk along the river walk, a place that symbolized her transformation. There, amidst the sound of the water and the gentle breeze, she reflected on how far she had come. One of these walks brought an unexpected encounter. While observing the bustling scene around her, she noticed Daniel sitting on a bench, reading a book. When he saw her, he greeted her with a warm smile. "Melanie, looks like fate enjoys crossing our paths." She laughed and joined him. Their conversation began light, filled with anecdotes about work and business, but soon turned deeper. Daniel, with his characteristic calm, asked something that lingered in Melanie's mind long after. "Have you thought about what comes next? Not just for the company, but for you?" The question took her by surprise. For so long, Melanie had focused on rebuilding her life that she hadn't stopped to consider what she wanted beyond that. "I guess I've never given myself the chance to think about it," she admitted. "Maybe it's time to start," Daniel said with an encouraging smile. As Melanie mulled over his words, Jacob faced days that seemed to drag on without purpose. His routine consisted of long hours working at a local market, followed by lonely nights in his small apartment. He avoided any interaction that might expose his situation or remind him of the man he once was. Yet the ghosts of his past haunted him. He couldn't escape memories of Melanie, her strength, her determination, and above all, how he had underestimated her. He often wondered how his life would have turned out if he had chosen to stand by her instead of abandoning her at the hospital. In a moment of desperation, Jacob wrote another letter to Melanie. This time, it wasn't a plea for forgiveness, but a heartfelt confession. He admitted to his blindness, his superficiality, and his delayed realization that Melanie's true strength had never been in her appearance, but in her character. Yet, as he finished the letter, he decided not to send it. He knew Melanie didn't need his words. Everything she needed, she had already achieved on her own. While Jacob remained stagnant, Melanie began considering new horizons. Her friendship with Daniel deepened, and she slowly realized she trusted him in a way she never thought possible again. Still, Melanie was cautious. She knew how risky it was to open herself up again, but she also recognized that she couldn't let the past dictate her future. During a dinner in Austin, where they were attending a business conference, Daniel made a proposal that left Melanie thoughtful. "What if you let me help with the next chapter? Not just in business, but in life?" Melanie smiled, feeling the weight of his words. "Daniel, what do you see in me? After everything I've been through, how can you be so confident?" "I see someone who turned pain into strength, someone who didn't just survive but thrived. How could I not admire that?" His words stayed with Melanie in the days that followed. She knew she was standing at the threshold of something new, something that could be good, if she allowed it. Meanwhile, Jacob faced the reality that there was no one left to blame. He spent hours replaying moments when he could have made different choices, but deep down, he knew there was no going back. One morning, while out buying groceries, he crossed paths with an old acquaintance who barely recognized him. Jacob realized he had become irrelevant, a hard truth to accept. Melanie, on the other hand, continued to evolve. She decided to expand her company into the international market, a bold step that required months of planning and dedication. Throughout the process, she had Daniel's unwavering support, not just as a business ally, but as someone she trusted completely. During a trip to New York to negotiate a major contract, Melanie had a realization that left her emotional. She wasn't just leading a company, she was creating a legacy, and that legacy had nothing to do with Jacob or what they had once built together. It was entirely her own. Upon returning to San Antonio, Melanie visited Grace at her bookstore, as she often did. Over tea, she shared her thoughts. "You know, Grace, I think I've finally understood what you meant about carrying the weight of the past. It doesn't disappear, but I don't feel like it defines me anymore." Grace smiled, placing a hand over Melanie's. "That's because you've finally put it where it belongs, behind you." As Melanie moved forward, Jacob remained trapped in a cycle of regret. He knew he would never regain what he had lost, and the weight of his choices followed him everywhere. Melanie embraced her future with determination. Her story of resilience now inspired thousands, but for her the greatest triumph was knowing she had rebuilt her life with courage, integrity, and purpose. She had reached a place that once seemed impossible. Her achievements went beyond awards and contracts. For the first time, she felt entirely free from the past, no longer bound by the painful memories of Jacob and what he had represented. During a meeting with investors at her new headquarters, one attendee casually mentioned Jacob's downfall. "I heard he's working at a neighborhood grocery store. Who would have thought? Someone like Jacob King ending up like that?" The comment didn't bring the satisfaction it might have in the past. Melanie listened without reacting, maintaining her composure. It was clear to her that fate had already dealt with Jacob, and she didn't need to involve herself. Still, the moment reminded her of how their lives had diverged, how she had risen while he had fallen. After the meeting, Melanie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. Her company was now one of the most respected in the market, with operations reaching beyond San Antonio's borders. Yet despite everything, she couldn't shake a quiet curiosity about Jacob. It wasn't longing or resentment, but a desire to understand how someone who had once had so much could have destroyed himself so completely. During a dinner with Daniel, the subject resurfaced. As they discussed plans for the company's next expansion, Daniel noticed Melanie seemed distracted. "What's bothering you?" he asked with his usual patience. Melanie hesitated before answering. "Sometimes I wonder if I've truly moved on. I know Jacob doesn't have any power over me anymore, but every now and then I think about how things could have been different." Daniel listened carefully before responding. "Thinking about the past doesn't mean you're still tied to it. It's human. But I think you more than anyone know that you can't carry its weight forever." Daniel's words lingered with Melanie in the days that followed. She knew there was far more ahead of her than behind, yet she couldn't shake a sense of restlessness, as if something was still unresolved. Meanwhile, Jacob faced the lowest point of his life. His routine had become monotonous and desolate. He worked long hours at a local grocery store, earning just enough to survive. Each day he felt more irrelevant, a shadow of the man he had once been. Yet, the memories of Melanie haunted him. Her strength, determination, and the way he had underestimated her lingered in his mind. He often wondered what his life might have been if he had chosen to stay by her side instead of walking away. One afternoon, while restocking shelves, Jacob overheard two customers discussing Melanie. They spoke about a recent lecture she had given, praising her story of resilience and the transformation of Collins Innovations into a model of success. Hearing her name caused a sharp pain in Jacob's chest. He already knew Melanie had thrived without him, but hearing the details of her triumph felt like a knife twisting in the wound. That night, Jacob returned to his empty apartment, staring at the bare walls. The thought that his life had hit a dead end was inescapable. Sitting at his small table, he tried to write another letter to Melanie, but this time the words wouldn't come. He knew that anything he wrote would be meaningless. Melanie didn't need his words. She had built a life far beyond him. and he, in turn, had nothing left to offer. While Jacob sank deeper into regret, Melanie continued to expand her influence. Her company was preparing for a major event in New York, where she was to be honored as one of the most influential business leaders in the country. The recognition was a milestone in her career, but for Melanie it represented something much more significant, a personal victory over everything that had once tried to break her. Shortly before her trip, something unexpected happened. Grace, always attentive, came to Melanie with news about Jacob. "He's been evicted," Grace said in a neutral tone. "I think he's living in a shelter now." Melanie was silent for a moment, processing the information. She didn't feel joy at Jacob's misfortune, but she also couldn't summon any compassion. "There's nothing I can do for him," she finally said. "Jacob made his choices, and what's happening to him now is the result of those choices." Grace nodded, though she could tell the news had left Melanie thoughtful. Despite everything, it was hard to completely ignore someone who had once meant so much. As she prepared for her trip to New York, Melanie decided to revisit the documents from Collins and King that she had acquired months earlier. While flipping through the papers, she came across an old photograph from the company's inauguration. She and Jacob were smiling in the picture, filled with hope and ambition. For a brief moment, Melanie felt a pang of nostalgia, but she quickly set the photo aside, tucking it into a drawer before returning to her work. When Melanie arrived in New York, she was greeted with admiration and enthusiasm. The event was grand, and Melanie was the center of attention. During her tribute, as she listened to the organizers' words of praise, she was struck by a powerful realization. Her story wasn't about overcoming Jacob. It was about overcoming herself, proving that she could rebuild her life and succeed, even under the worst circumstances. As Melanie shone in New York, Jacob endured another lonely night in a crowded shelter. Lying on a cot, staring at the ceiling while muffled sounds of other occupants filled the room, he thought about Melanie. He knew she was far away, physically and emotionally, and that any chance of reconnection was impossible. But Jacob didn't want reconnection. He wanted peace, something that felt entirely out of reach. When Melanie returned to San Antonio, she felt lighter than ever. The trip had reaffirmed what she already knew. Her worth had never been tied to Jacob or anyone else. She was a woman of strength, and her future was brighter than ever. This realization prepared her to finally close the chapter on Jacob for good, and it seemed as though fate was about to assist her in doing so. While the sun shone brightly over San Antonio, Jacob's days were gray and indistinguishable. His life had become a cycle of temporary jobs and lonely nights in shelters, consumed by regret. Every choice he had made had led him here, to a life marked by solitude, shame, and the loss of everything he once held dear. His deepest regret, however, was losing Melanie. He knew she had been the one true and solid aspect of his life, but it was a lesson learned far too late. Meanwhile, Melanie was at the peak of her journey. Her company flourished, expanding into new markets, and her presence was in high demand at prestigious events. Yet something unexpected happened one afternoon at her office. Rebecca Adams, her business partner and close friend, entered with a worried expression and surprising news. "Did you know Jacob is trying to find you?" Melanie looked up from her papers, startled. "What do you mean?" "He's been asking some people about you. I'm not sure what he wants, but I thought you should know." Melanie took a deep breath, processing the information. It was hard to imagine what Jacob could want now. He was already a broken man. What more could he ask for? Still, the news stirred a quiet unease she couldn't ignore. A few days later, while walking along the river walk, Melanie was approached by a man she recognized as a former Collins and King employee. He seemed hesitant as he stepped closer. "Excuse me, Melanie, but do you have a moment? It's about Jacob." She stopped, uncertain. The man continued, "I saw him the other day. He looked bad. He mentioned you. I think he's trying to find a way to ask for forgiveness. I just thought you should know." Melanie felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Jacob was her past. She knew that. But the thought that he still thought about her, still sought redemption, brought memories she had buried back to the surface. That night, alone in her apartment, Melanie revisited every pivotal moment of her history with Jacob: the passionate beginning, the hard work to build Collins and King, the fire, and finally, the moment he abandoned her in the hospital. Each scene was a reminder of how far she had come and how deeply he had betrayed her. Meanwhile, Jacob finally mustered the courage to attempt one last contact. He knew where Melanie worked, but also understood that showing up unannounced would be a mistake. Instead, he wrote another letter, a final confession of his mistakes and a request for forgiveness, even though he knew she would never take him back. He delivered the letter in person, waiting at the reception desk as the receptionist took it to her office. Melanie received the envelope during a meeting. Seeing Jacob's name on the sender line triggered a wave of irritation mixed with curiosity. She didn't open it right away. She set it aside and calmly finished her meeting, maintaining the composure she had mastered in tense situations. Later, in her quiet office, she opened the envelope. Jacob's words were raw and painful, but held no surprises. He admitted every mistake, every selfish choice, and took full responsibility for the destruction of his own life. He asked for nothing except for Melanie to know that he finally understood what she had meant to him, and that he deeply regretted never valuing her while he had the chance. When Melanie finished reading, she felt something unexpected: relief. The letter didn't leave her sad or angry. On the contrary, it felt like a door closing once and for all. Jacob no longer had any power over her, emotionally or otherwise. The next day, while reviewing a new project with her team, Melanie received another unexpected message. The receptionist informed her that Jacob was in the lobby, asking to see her. For a moment, she considered refusing, but then decided to face him. She went down to the reception area and found Jacob waiting, visibly uncomfortable. He looked even more worn than she had imagined. His clothes were shabby, and he avoided her gaze. "Melanie, thank you for seeing me. I know you didn't have to." "You have 5 minutes," she replied firmly. Jacob started hesitantly, but soon poured out everything he had held back. He spoke of realizing too late how much she had meant to him, how Amanda had betrayed him and left him in ruins, and how every decision he made had led to losing everything. "I don't expect your forgiveness," he said finally. "I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. For everything." Melanie studied him for a moment before responding. "Jacob, what do you want me to say? That I accept your apologies, that I feel sorry for what happened to you? I can't do that. Not because I'm angry, but because your life now has nothing to do with me. You made your choices, and I made mine." Jacob nodded, defeat written all over his face. He knew there was no redemption for him, not there, not with her. "Thank you for listening," he said quietly, before getting up to leave. Melanie watched him go without saying another word. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders, as if that moment had finally closed a cycle that had lingered far too long. As Jacob walked out of the building, he returned to the streets aimlessly, knowing that this was the final thread connecting him to Melanie. He faded back into anonymity, living out the rest of his life in solitary regret. Melanie, on the other hand, returned to her office feeling lighter than ever. Jacob was now firmly in her past. There was no more space for him in her life or her thoughts. The climax of their story was complete. The man who had abandoned and underestimated her was now facing the full weight of his choices, while Melanie flourished in a life built on courage, integrity, and determination. The final chapter of Melanie and Jacob's story was written by time, with the precision of an unyielding destiny that balanced every action with its consequence. For Jacob, life no longer held the promise of new beginnings. He vanished from San Antonio's social circles, leaving behind a ruined reputation and a trail of bitter memories. His existence dwindled to a near-mechanical routine, low-paying jobs, nights in shelters, and a silence that shadowed him relentlessly. In his mind, memories of Melanie haunted him, not because she was still present, but because he knew he could never escape what he had done. He didn't hate her. On the contrary, he admired her more than anyone he had ever known. But that admiration was paired with a corrosive regret. He knew he had been the architect of his own destruction, and that Melanie, in the end, was the living proof of everything he was not. One ordinary day, while walking through the bustling streets of a small town he now called home, Jacob passed a newsstand. The cover of a business magazine caught his eye. It featured Melanie's face, smiling confidently in front of her company headquarters. The headline read, "From Ashes to Gold, Melanie Collins redefines success." Jacob used what little money he had to buy the magazine and read the article in silence. Each word was a reminder of his insignificance. While Melanie was celebrated as a paragon of resilience and leadership, he was nothing more than a forgotten figure. He carefully folded the magazine and kept it, not as a reminder of his fall, but as a symbol of what Melanie had become. Melanie, meanwhile, was living the peak of her fulfillment. Her company, now a powerhouse in the market, was frequently mentioned in national and international publications. More importantly, her story of overcoming adversity continued to inspire people from all walks of life. She received messages from women who found strength in her words, who saw in her achievements a reflection of their own struggles. Despite her success, Melanie maintained the humility that defined her. For her, each day was an opportunity to create something meaningful and to give back to those who had supported her during her darkest moments. Rebecca, her business partner and friend, often praised her vision and determination. "You're not just a businesswoman, Melanie. You're an example of what it means to never give up, even when the world tries to knock you down." Those words served as a constant reminder of how far she had come and how she had found strength within herself. Melanie's life moved at a steady, vibrant pace, but she made sure to carve out moments for herself. One quiet afternoon during a walk along the river walk, she spotted Grace sitting on a bench, gazing at the calm waters. Melanie joined her, and the two sat in companionable silence for a few moments before Grace spoke. "I always knew you'd get here, you know," Grace said with a smile. Melanie chuckled softly. "You always had more faith in me than I did, because I knew you were different. You didn't let hardships define you, you used them to transform yourself." Grace's words stayed with Melanie as she continued her journey. Every achievement and moment of peace reminded her that she had triumphed, not just over Jacob but over her own doubts and fears. While Melanie flourished, Jacob continued to fade. He avoided places where he might see familiar faces, choosing instead to live in areas where no one knew him. One particularly difficult day while working at a convenience store, Jacob overheard a young entrepreneur discussing a business idea with the store owner. For a fleeting moment, Jacob wanted to intervene to share his expertise, but he knew his words held no value there. That moment forced Jacob to confront what he had become. He was no longer Jacob King, the charismatic and ambitious businessman. He was just a lost man, purposeless, weighed down by the consequences of his choices. Meanwhile, Melanie's horizons continued to expand. During a trip to Paris for an international conference, she reconnected with Daniel. He was there representing another company, but the two quickly rekindled the friendship they had built months earlier. Over dinner at a small Parisian restaurant, Daniel asked a question that surprised Melanie. "Do you think there will ever be a point where you stop building and just live?" Melanie thought for a moment before answering. "For me, building is living. But maybe it's time to think about something more." Daniel smiled. "When you decide it's time, I hope I can be a part of it." His words lingered in Melanie's mind for the rest of the trip. She knew she was ready for something more, but for the first time it would be something she chose for herself, not because someone else expected it of her. Back in San Antonio, Melanie dedicated herself to new projects, including initiatives to support women entrepreneurs facing challenges similar to those she had overcome. Her vision was clear: to create a legacy that was more than financial success. Jacob, on the other hand, was slowly disappearing. One lonely night, as he walked the deserted streets of his new town, he stopped in front of a store window displaying televisions. One screen played a segment on Melanie, highlighting her recent achievements. Jacob stood still, watching in silence. When the piece ended, he sighed and continued walking, his shadow merging with the darkness. The paths of Jacob and Melanie had been set. She had found strength in adversity, building a life that reflected not just her resilience, but also her commitment to something greater than herself. He, by contrast, was an example of what happens when selfish choices and vanity overshadow what truly matters. Melanie no longer thought about Jacob. He was a closed chapter, a part of her story that had shaped her but no longer defined her. She understood that her greatest triumph wasn't just overcoming what he had done, but becoming someone who no longer needed anyone else to feel complete. As the sun set over San Antonio, Melanie walked along the river walk, feeling at peace. Miles away, Jacob sat on a park bench in an empty playground, alone with his thoughts and regrets. Life continued to move in opposite directions for them, just as it should. If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep discovering inspiring and emotional tales, don't forget to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can illuminate your journey and offer valuable insights. Click on the next video suggestion on your screen. We're sure it'll resonate with you, and we'll see you there.